Hey everyone, welcome to Sunday, Bloody Sunday. Today we've got a interesting case, the case of Adrienne Hickson. Now, of all the cases I've covered so far, this one's definitely the most depressing as far as the people involved, because the two young people involved in this crime had very promising futures ahead of them and just went tragically, tragically wrong. So let's get into it, shall we? Adrienne Emily Hickson was born December 1981 to Sherman and Yvonne Hickson of Aiken, South Carolina. He was a dentist with a long-standing practice in Aiken. Her mother was a very highly placed administrator in the South Carolina public school system. So in all accounts, Adrienne had a very privileged upper middle class upbringing with highly educated parents that encouraged their children to literally be all that they could be. A little bit of tragedy. She had an older sister and a younger brother, but she had a older brother that was killed at the age of 6 in a car accident. So Adrienne was the baby the kind of the miracle baby that came along after the death of their son, and she was doted on even more than her older sister and her younger brother. Adrienne was absolutely the apple of her father's eye, and he literally gave her everything because, according to him, she was what he wished for after the death of his son. He wanted a little girl with her exact attributes, and according to him, that's exactly what he got. So as you can imagine, he was just absolutely enamored with her and spoiled her rotten. But from all accounts, Adrienne was not a spoiled, rotten brat of a child. She was very well mannered, very soft spoken, very friendly, very playful, just an all around good kid who excelled. Actually, all the Hickson children excelled in academics. Her older sister went on to become a doctor. Her younger brother also went to college and did very well. But Adrienne, just like them, excelled in high school, graduated with honors, and eventually, because she had spent a lot of time with her dad and wanted to be daddy's girl, she decided to attend his alma mater, his undergraduate alma mater, which was Tennessee State University, which is a historically black college in Nashville, Tennessee. And they had spent many years going to TSU football games, going to her father's class reunion, and to homecoming. And so she just fell in love with the campus and with the city of Nashville. So that's where she wanted to go to school. And in the 1997-1998 school year, she did enroll at TSU. And there she met Sean Sewell Washington, who was born September 1981 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He was born to Karen Sewell, who was not married to uh, Sean's father. In fact, Sean carried his mother's name, Sewell, uh, up until he was 13 years old when he finally met his father, Isaac Washington Sr. And by that time, Isaac Sr. had already remarried to a woman named Patricia and had another son whom he named Isaac Jr. And the boys had never met each other. They'd only met each other when they were both teenagers, and from all accounts, they took to each other. Isaac Sr. apologized to Sean for basically deserting he and his mother and said that he made a dumb mistake and was wanting to make it up to him and actually be the father he deserved. And it sort of even though it had a rocky beginning, it had a happy ending because they did become very close, both Sean to his father and Sean to the brother he didn't know he had. So, by all accounts, that part of it ended happily. But Sean was, as I said, was raised by a single mother, went to Central High School in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But even though he did okay in school, he wasn't what you would call super academic. He was definitely a kid that was raised on the streets, raised in very low income housing with a mother that had to work 24/7 to support him, and he ran the streets, for lack of a better term. Kind of grew up kind of rough, fell in with some gang members and things like that, but he did excel at athletics. And it was because of that that he was also able to enroll at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. One reason that Adrienne's parents were very glad that she did decide to go to college out of state is because her high school boyfriend had been less than stellar. He had been very verbally and even physically abusive to her at times. So they were glad that her going away, moving about 3 states over to go to college, would get her away from him. And so that relationship ended much to the relief of Sherman and Navon Hickson. And immediately, though, her freshman year, she met Sean, and the two hit it off and began dating. At first, it was a great relationship. They got along. Sean spoiled her, just like her father had in a way. He bought her whatever she wanted, took her out to eat. They went clubbing. They basically had just a very fun relationship, the kind of relationship you would expect to have in your undergraduate years in college. But eventually, things kind of took a bad turn because Sean began running with the same kind of crowd he had ran with back home in Chattanooga. He ran with a wilder crowd at TSU. TSU, even though it's a great college, it's in what you would call a fairly bad neighborhood in Nashville. There's a lot of street crime there. There's a lot of drug houses and things like that just outside the perimeter of the college. So it's kind of an odd place for a college to be. So unfortunately, TSU students have easy access to that sort of thing, and Sean fell in with a bad crowd. He started running the streets again, running with bad crowds. He became uh, an avid smoker of marijuana, which Adrienne did not agree with. I don't want anybody to say I'm passing judgment. I have nothing against marijuana at all. I think it should be legal, but he started there and then gradually kind of elevated up to other kinds of drugs and started selling some of it on the side to make extra money because he wanted to keep Adrienne in the lifestyle that she'd become accustomed to. Because he was from a working class poor family, working poor family, and she was from an upper middle class family that gave her whatever she wanted, and he felt he had to have the money to supply her with that. So therefore, he did some unscrupulous things to make that happen. One of the people he began running with was a gentleman named, one of the people that he started hanging out with was a gentleman named Michael Buchanan, who will play an integral part later on in this story, but by all reports, a drug dealer and a drug runner. So that was the type of company that Sean was starting to keep at TSU. And from her friends' accounts, Adrienne was starting to take issue with it, as well as she didn't fully trust him that he was 100% monogamous with her either. So there started to be a lot of infighting between them, and by all accounts, Sean was becoming paranoid and possessive and would basically question Adrienne about her goings and comings, about any conversation she had with anybody of the opposite sex, and there was a lot of fights. So everybody was just figuring that once graduation got there and Adrienne graduated because she was a year ahead of Michael as far as in the academic way, because Sean wasn't really serious about his classes by all accounts. So he failed a couple and was just very, very behind. But Adrienne was going to graduate on time, if not early. So everybody figured that when she graduated, because she wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, so she was starting to prepare for law school, that she would leave and leave him behind. And so it would just kind of take care of itself, much like the relationship with her high school boyfriend had. But that wasn't the case. She graduated from TSU in 2001 and moved to Atlanta, to Duluth, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, to pursue studies for the law school admissions test, or LSAT. Atlanta offered a lot more opportunity for that. They offered individual classes and also opportunities for her to work while she studied as a paralegal. So she made the decision to move to Atlanta, and Sean begged to go with her. He said, I want to go with you. I don't want to be apart from you. Please, I don't care about school. She tried to convince him to stay and finish his degree, but he was dead set on going with her. So the two moved to Duluth, Georgia, outside of Atlanta in 2001, and he got a job working for Flowers Bakery, driving a delivery truck, making around $18, $19 an hour, which was excellent money in the early 2000s, and more than enough to live a decent lifestyle in a suburb of Atlanta. So the two rented an apartment together in Duluth, And by all accounts, between her money she earned from being a paralegal and what he earned from driving a bakery truck, they lived a fairly good middle class lifestyle and clubbed and went out to eat. And he still, showered her with gifts and things like that. Though one thing that she made him promise is that he would not get involved with the same kind of people he had been involved with in Chattanooga and in Nashville, specifically Mr. Buchanan, that he would leave that part of his life behind, and he promised her that he would be totally different. And about this time, his younger brother, Isaac Washington Jr., had moved to Atlanta as well and lived near them in Duluth, so he started hanging out more with his brother rather than getting in with unsavory elements. Now, remember, Isaac was raised by his stepmother and father away from Chattanooga and had an entirely different type of growing up, so had never been out on the street and had done the kind of things that Sean had to do to survive. So it was a much better influence on Sean to have his brother there. But Adrienne worked hard, she studied, she did well on the LSAT, and as a result was accepted to Howard University in Washington, D.C. Howard is a very well-known historically black college. Turns out a lot of the great African American politicians of our day, so it was a great honor for her to be accepted there. And of course, she could not turn that down. And so this time, because his brother was there and because he had a job where he had benefits and potential retirement and one that he enjoyed and made really good money at, Sean decided to stay back in Atlanta. His brother moved in to the apartment, took over Adrienne's part of the rent, and he made the decision to stay in Atlanta and not follow her to DC. Uh, so their relationship went from living together to very long distance. There's about a 600 or 700 mile radius between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, Georgia. So huge amount of distance to overcome. So she went to law school. He stayed in Atlanta with his brother, and she did well in law school. And by all accounts, she would go back to Atlanta at least once or twice a month to see Sean. Both his brother and his father collaborated that he would send her money to buy tickets or buy the airfare and send it to her to get her there. So he did not stop spending all of his money on Adrienne just because she wasn't there. So they became very much long distance. Uh, in her senior year of law school, which is the third year, she had just finished her fall semester finals and she returned to Atlanta to spend the Christmas holidays with Sean on December 17th, 2005. Their relationship had grown more and more strained. They were, they fought a lot, but they were really wanting to make it a go. And since it was around her birthday and she came back, he planned a party for her. He had her an ice cream cake, bottle of wine, took her out to eat. Uh, then every night that she was there for the 2 weeks she was going to be there. But when she got back, she overheard him talking to Michael Buchanan, who was moving to Atlanta with his girlfriend, Monique Dawes, talking to Sean about possibly helping them move and taking them to get a rental car. So automatically, in her mind, there's a broken promise. You're running with this guy who is still a drug dealer. Do not fall back into this lifestyle, Sean. So according to Isaac Washington Jr., Sean's brother, they were fighting a lot during that 2 weeks because of Michael and because that she suspected he was starting to hang out with an unsavory element again. And on top of it, she suspected he was screwing around on her. So there was a lot of fights. Some of them became physical. And according to Isaac, it was not good. It was not good at all. And all of this kind of boiled over on December 21st, 2005, when Adrienne was upset because she was about to leave to go spend the holidays with a few days of the holiday with her family in South Carolina. So this was essentially going to be their last day together until she came back after Christmas. And she expected to spend the entire day with him. But instead, he left with Michael and Monique at about 10 a.m. to go help them get a rental car and move some stuff into their apartment, and basically went radio dead silent. So Monique was calling Sean, asking where he was, and he goes, "Well, I'm taking them to get a rental car." She said, "They called. This is at 3 p.m." She said, they called you at 10 a.m. You still haven't gotten a rental car. What's going on? I need you to come home now. So, according to Michael and Monique, they were kind of teasing him about it, saying, "Oh, she's got you on a short leash, hasn't she, dog?" and all this stuff. And, it was kind of making him a little defensive. But they went back to the apartment. Adrienne met them in the parking lot as soon as Sean stepped out of the car, out of his Mustang. He had a red Mustang. Monique and Michael both said that they got she got in his face and an argument ensued. And they didn't exactly hear what was said, but they heard the yelling and the screaming, and Adrienne hit him in the face. And when that happened, Sean kind of snapped and said, "You need to go get your stuff and leave. I don't want anything to do with you. It's over. Go." So she went back into the apartment. He looked at them and says, "I can't leave her alone in our apartment. I'm afraid she might mess some things up. I'm going to go up and make sure she's just getting her stuff. I'll be back." He followed her into the apartment. Okay. This is where the details get a little fuzzy because we have two different sides of the story here, but according to most accounts, there was a more altercation. Both of them were putting their hands on each other. It was getting physical. Adrienne had bruises on her face and on her neck. He had other kinds of defensive bruises where evidently they were taking slugs at each other. Well, eventually a kitchen knife, a steak knife, ended up in Adrienne's hands, and she stabbed Sean twice. Once in the arm, once here in the upper clavicle region. He immediately fell backwards and stumbled across the apartment, out the door, and down the steps toward his friends. Adrienne said that she was still so distraught and so enraged that she turned and stabbed Isaac and Sean's couch several times because she was so distraught. She said she barely remembers any of this. And then she dropped the knife, grabbed her stuff, ran down the steps because she was petrified of what was going to happen, jumped into her car, and took off for South Carolina. In the meantime, Sean has stumbled down the steps. His shirt appears to be wet, according to his friends, but when he gets closer, they realize that's blood, and they throw him into the back of his own car. Monique said she got back there to hold his head to make sure he was okay, while Michael drove the car toward Gwinnett Medical Center. Um, According to his friends, Sean was going in and out of consciousness, saying, I'm gone. And Michael was saying, "No, you're not gone. You're here. We're going to get you to the hospital. Everything's going to be okay." They got him to the ER. He was immediately admitted and taken back. At this time, his friends left, took a taxi over and got their rental car and went about trying to get into their apartment because they had to be in that day. They figured he was in good hands. He was going to be okay. They also called his father and his brother. His brother, who was at work, hung up from Monique's call, called their father and said, Adrienne has stabbed Sean. He's in the hospital. I don't know what condition he's in. I'm heading there now. So stepmother and father get in their car, head to Atlanta. Isaac Jr. calls Adrienne. She picks up the phone, and he says, "So you're just going to stab my brother and leave?" And she goes, "I didn't stab your brother. What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, he stabbed himself twice?" And she goes, "Yeah, something like that." And then hung up. So he said, "I don't have time for this." He jumped in his car and headed for the hospital. Meanwhile, Monique is heading for Aiken, South Carolina on I-75 as quick as she can. She calls her older sister, who's a doctor, and explains what happened and said, "I don't know what to do." She says, "I'm going to call mom and dad. Just keep heading home." So she calls Sherman and Avon. They immediately jump into their car and head toward Atlanta. They make contact with their daughter on the drive, and they pull into a rest stop to meet each other halfway between Aiken, South Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia. They immediately put their daughter in their car, and they said, "The best thing we can do is head back for Atlanta. You don't want to come off as if you're running from this." So they leave her car, they lock up her car, leave it at the rest area, and they head for Atlanta, but they don't go immediately to the hospital to check on Sean. They first make some calls, and they secure her an attorney. They take her to the attorney's office. He says that the best way to handle this is to go ahead and go over to the DA's office and surrender, which I thought was weird. Wouldn't they take her to the police station there in Duluth to surrender? But they went to the DA's office. The clerks in the DA's office checked the database. They say so far there's no arrest warrants pending, so we can't legally hold you. You are free to go, but be prepared for a phone call if a warrant does come through, and you will need to come back and surrender. In the meantime, Gwinnett County Sheriff has only started to investigate. They're talking to Michael Buchanan, they're talking to Isaac Jr., they're talking to Monique, trying to piece together what happened because right now Sean is in and out of consciousness in the hospital. He lost a lot of blood, so he's kind of in and out, kind of woozy. So they're trying to piece together what happened. They have a name, Adrienne Hickson, but they can't really hold anything to her until they get the full story. So her and her family go back toward Aiken, South Carolina. They stop. Uh, Her dad lets her mom and her go on in his SUV. He stops at the rest stop, gets Adrienne's car, follows them the rest of the way back to Aiken. And they go about with their normal Christmas plans. Meanwhile, Sean is in and out of consciousness for the next 3 to 4 days in the hospital. His head's swelling up, his chest is swelling up, his vital signs are getting worse. He's being put in ICU. So now the police are kind of holding off because they think instead of an aggravated assault charge, they may have a potential murder or manslaughter charge. So they wait. And unfortunately, due to a very small major artery being clipped during the stabbing, Sean does expire Christmas afternoon about 3 p.m. He does. They do take him off the machines. He's in a coma. The doctors have assured them he's not going to wake up, and he does die. Very young life lost. And immediately, the Washington family call the Hickson family just to let them know that Sean has passed away. Adrienne's mom tells her. She just basically goes nuts, runs out of the house, grabs the keys to her brother's car, jumps into his car, and peels out for Atlanta. Well, of course, her parents get into their SUV and take off after her. They head immediately for Gwinnett Medical Center. They're expecting their daughter to be there. When they get there, the Washington family's outside kind of consoling each other, and they join them. A few minutes later, Adrienne, who did not go immediately to that hospital, she went to another hospital, and basically, according to witnesses there, walked into a storage room, stole 2 sets of scrubs, put those scrubs on, and left in them. I guess she was going to try to look like a medical professional, try to get into Sean's room somehow without being recognized. Evidently, she wasn't thinking clearly. But about 10 minutes after her parents got there, Adrienne does pull up. She comes up to where they all are outside the main entrance, and they tell her that Sean didn't make it. She passes out cold on the concrete, literally smacking her head on the concrete. Her father puts her into his SUV, drives her around to the emergency entrance, and she's admitted. And while she's in the hospital, a Gwinnett County Sheriff arrests her for the murder, both the aggravated assault and murder of Sean Washington. She's held in the without bond in the Gwinnett County Jail. Her lawyer took on a defense of self-defense from an abusive man. This is what he put forth at the trial. She testified about several instances, both when they were in Nashville and Atlanta, where he basically tried to choke her to death. And I'm going to insert a clip of her testifying right here.
Mind when you're being choked.
You can't breathe. It cuts off. It cuts off your circulation. Like you can't. It's no gasping for air, and you feel like this swollen lump in your throat.
Prosecution is saying that they didn't believe it was self-defense because of her history of jealousy and fights, and also the fact that the couch was stabbed after the fact, which leads them to believe it was anger, not self-defense. But of course, the two sides went back and forth. Testifying for the prosecution was Monique Doss. Michael Buchanan was unable to testify because he had been killed in a drug-related crime. So, Anyway, the jury deliberated for about 24 hours and finally sent word to the judge that they were hopelessly hung. There were 7 people that wanted to convict her of murder, while the other wanted to acquit based on self-defense. So they were hopelessly hung, and this resulted in a mistrial. Adrienne's attorney was concerned that now the prosecution knew his defense. They knew how to talk about how to counter everything that he had put forth. So he convinced Adrienne and her family to accept a plea deal based on her pleading guilty to manslaughter, which would carry a 5-year prison sentence along with 15 years probation. The prosecution at first was against this because they felt they could get a murder conviction, but being about the 2 families were just done, even the Washington family, they were just done. They didn't want to go through this anymore. They agreed to the plea. So she did plead guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 5 years in Georgia State Prison for Women. She was released in 2010 and served 2 years probation, after which she was applied to come off of probation. So she came off of probation in 2012 and is working on a way to revive her law career, because she was, of course, expelled from Howard University because of this. So she's working on a way to continue her dream of becoming a criminal defense attorney. And that's where we stand. One young life taken, one young life ruined. Uh, that's the story of Adrienne Hickson. Definitely one of the sadder ones I've covered on Sunday, Bloody Sunday, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, guys. Let me know down below. Comment on some cases you'd like me to work on this coming Wednesday's White Collar Crime Wednesday. I'm going to do Bernie Madoff Part 1. But let me know, both whether it's murder or white collar crime, what are some cases you would like me to cover? I'm open to all suggestions, guys. Thank you so much. Remember, ketosis, y'all. Keto comic. Out.